Time to do some off-road lawnmower maintenance. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is probably change the oil in this engine, and something you actually want to check out when you're changing your oil is this seal down here at the bottom of the dipstick. And the reason I say that is because these things wear out really easily. They get hot and they warp and they just suck after a very short amount of time. You can pick up a new one for just a couple of bucks. There's the part number. That's pretty much what it looks like. I've already installed a new one in this particular engine, but I always buy extras. All you basically have to do to install this thing is unbolt this one bolt, pull this dipstick out, make sure you actually tip the tractor off of level or park it on a hillside so all the oil drains the other way. You don't actually need to drain all the oil to do this. Then you can pry this little seal right up off the motor and take your new seal and basically pop it back down into place, put a little bit of oil on it, put your dipstick tube, press that back down into the seal and bolt it back on, and you are done. That seal's pretty important to have on there, and it's good to have a good seal on that thing because of all the crankcase pressure that builds when you rev your engine up. As you rev your motor, the pressure builds so much that it could actually start splooging oil out of between that seal and that dipstick, and you definitely don't want that to happen. So be sure to replace those regularly if it starts leaking. So you can see it's draining, and it's actually slightly discolored. I don't even know if you guys can see that on the camera, but it's kind of a weird color. Probably has a lot of fuel mixed in with it, which isn't good. So it's a good thing we're getting this out of here now. Alright, so with the engine oil change out of the way, I gotta get this Murray turned around and jacked up so I can remove the rear wheels and the transmission, get all that pulled out from underneath it, and it's probably gonna be quite the pain in the ass because I just put all those guards and plates in place and all these other things. So I'm probably gonna have to undo a lot of that stuff and basically gut the whole ass end of the Murray, get the transmission out, and then throw it down on my desk and start surgery. So we've obviously got the transaxle out of the lawnmower, and we're just kind of doing a visual inspection, just checking things out right now. Nothing looks really cracked or broken or anything. I got some of the dirt off here. The input shaft pulley is a little loose. Actually, I don't think it's the pulley. I think it's the whole shaft. But we'll have to see what that's all about in there. Everything else seems nice and tight. The axle shafts, they have a little bit of play, not too bad. Not as bad as I would have expected. But yeah, I gotta take this thing, I gotta pressure wash it off because it's still covered in filth. Once I finish doing that, we will bring it in here and start splitting it open. Alright, so I got the transmission dropped out of there and I finally got it cracked open. But actually a couple weeks has gone by since the last little bit of footage there, and a few things have changed. So here's the old transaxle out of the Murray, and you can see I've got all the bolts there piled on the top of the input pulley. So there's the inside of the transaxle, and actually everything is in quite good condition. I am very, very surprised at how good things look. The only problem I have with this transaxle, as it is right now, is a lot of the seals are leaking. The axle seals, the brake seal, the input shaft seal is actually leaking a little bit too. And it's very loose in both directions. It wiggles this way a little bit. You can't really see it on the camera. But it's getting worn out, and so I think the idea now is going to be to replace this transmission with a new one. And here she is. I just got this one in the mail, and this is a brand new Tecumseh Peerless MST 205 510D. Basically the same model as my old transmission. This one is a little bit different, I guess, because the part number is a little bit different. Maybe they just changed the number, I'm not really sure. The casting numbers all match up with my old one. There's a couple there and there's one there. So I think it's generally the same. I think the idea here is going to be to open this transaxle up, and I'm actually going to swap in the locker and rear axles with my hubs into this transmission and put it all back together. The reason I have to swap everything is because, as you can see, my hubs are actually welded onto my axle shafts. So the whole axle shaft has to go with the wheels, basically, or else I have to replace the wheels. If I replace the wheels, then I'm starting to get into some astronomical costs here, and I've already spent enough money on this transmission. So I'm not going to do that right now. We're just going to swap the transmission out for what it is and run it. Now you're probably wondering why I didn't buy like a Peerless 820, and honestly it would have required a little bit of frame modification to get that to fit in there with the shifting mechanism and everything set up the way it is. Plus I would have had to buy new wheels, new tires, and you know, when I did the math, I'm looking at about $400 or $500 in parts for my off-road lawnmower, which is just a little ridiculous. So I decided to buy another original transmission because I've had very good luck with this transmission. I highly recommend it to you guys. It's oil filled and it's freaking awesome. I've had nothing but good luck with it. I've been running it for years and it still works. So that's why I'm taking it out of commission now. I'm going to swap in the new axle shafts and the carrier into the old transmission, and I'm going to use that for something else. I'm also going to be keeping the rear tires on there strictly because I really like the way the Murray is set up, so I don't really want to change much. For those of you saying that I need to go bigger and more badass with this thing, really I've got this thing here, which is actually going to get pretty well updated and a general overhaul. I'm not happy with a lot of things on this, so a lot of things are going to change. Nothing really major, but a lot of little things are definitely going to change. Alright, so all the oil is drained out of it and all the bolts are removed, top and bottom, and there were a couple different sizes. These long ones actually went up through the bottom and they were slightly longer than all of the rest of these ones. And I also checked the torque with my torque wrench on them. I tightened one just a little bit. Actually, I did it to a couple of them just to kind of check, and I found that they were all tightened to about 100 inch-pounds, so I'll remember that when it comes time to reassemble them. As you can see, my brakes are set off to the side there. I will be leaving the brakes on this transaxle since they work, but I'll probably only use them as a parking brake or something of that nature. But right now I'm going to pop this case open. The preferred method is to use a putty knife like this and possibly a hammer to get into these edges and break this seal. And then once we break the seal, I've got to clean it all up, swap my internals, and then put it back together. So let's have a look into a brand new axle. I got this thing opened up and everything looks perfectly fine, as it should. But everything in here looks generally the same. Nothing looks drastically different. So parts are swappable, which is awesome. The only parts I'm really interested in swapping right now are these axle shafts, the locker, probably the spider gears on the end of the axle shafts, and I will be removing these seals and be replacing them with these new seals and then putting all of it back together after I scrape up all this old gasket material, which is really going to suck. So here's a look at my locker that I welded approximately 4 or 5 years ago. You can see it's not a pretty weld at all, but it was hot and it was deep, which is what's important with these. I welded it with this welder right here, Lincoln Electric Weld Pack 100. Plugs into a standard household outlet. This thing is nothing to brag about. I always weld. I never have my wire speed above 3 for any reason. That's just ridiculous. 2.5 is usually the max for me. When welding these, I typically weld them onto the D setting, which is the highest setting, and usually around a wire speed of 2 to 2.5, because the idea is you don't want to fill it with welding material. You want to melt the parent metal to the spider gear and make this thing solid, which, as you can see, it's held up for 5 years in this transaxle. So let's hope we get a few more years out of it in this transaxle. There, we are locker swapped. I got everything perfectly lined up. It actually wasn't as difficult as it usually is. I was able to keep things lined up pretty well. I love the fact that these MST axles actually have double snap rings on the end. I don't know if you guys can see that there. There's 2 snap rings, which is friggin' awesome. It saves me the trouble of having to weld these stupid spider gears, which I usually do, because the single snap rings, it's not necessarily crucial to weld this, but the single snap rings can come undone, which does suck. You can see my old spider gears, or new spider gears from this new transmission. They're just sitting here along with my new axle shafts, and I'm sure people are going to wonder why I didn't try to cut these hubs off and put them on the new axle shafts. And really, these cases are aluminum, so if anything's going to wear out, more than likely it's going to be the aluminum, not the steel axle shaft. But I got the new axle seals on there. Like I said, the locker's in place. Everything's spinning really nicely. So the next step here for me is going to spend a long time scraping up all this gasket sealant and making sure it's all nice and clean on the bottom side of the case and the top side of the case, which is up here. And then I'm going to apply some new gasket sealant and put it back together. Top cover's back on, and again, it actually went a lot easier than I thought it was going to. Starting to put the bolts in. I got one there on the front and one there on the back. They're not totally tightened down, they're just holding the case halves together. As you can see, I'm starting to ooze out some of my sealant that I put in there. Also, something else that I'm doing is every time I put one of these bolts back in, I'm cleaning all the old sealant off and I'm putting on anti-seize lubricant, and this will keep the bolts from seizing in there because these are steel bolts going into an aluminum case. So anti-seize is a good thing because on my old transaxle a couple of the bolts actually broke off upon removing them, so I don't want that to happen ever again. So anti-seize on the bolts, and I'm going to torque all these down to 100 inch-pounds, and we are done. Alright, so now that everything's sealed up and dried, I put some new oil there in the case, and I'm working on getting the pulley on there now. And my old pulley was a 5-inch, and I'm putting a new pulley on that's also a 5-inch. I decided not to change my pulley ratio because frankly I love my tractor the way it is and I'm not going to change it, so that's just the way it's going to be. And something to note is this pulley, the neck on it isn't quite as long as the old one, or the hub on it isn't quite as long as the old one, so I had to put a couple of washers in here below the woodruff key as a spacer to keep it kind of up where I want it to, underneath the C-clip here. And you can see I've got a little bit of anti-seize on this pulley hub and shaft, and that's hopefully so I can remove it at a later date if I wish to. Alright, she's back down on the ground with tires on all fours. Let's start this thing up and listen to how it sounds, or if it's going to just make a lot of popping, cracking, braking noises. So it seems to shift a little hard, which is probably more the belt tension than the transmission, so I'm going to adjust the belt tension a little bit, see if I can fix that a little bit. But other than that, I think this is a done deal. I can't really go romp it right now because it's kind of dark outside, as you can see behind me. So I'll probably wait till daylight to romp it so you guys can actually see. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this update, you guys. Let me know what you think. I know it isn't anything spectacular, just swapping transmissions and changing oil and stupid shit like that, but it's something. It's work on the Murray. This thing is going to be used a lot this summer, so I wanted to make sure it was good and ready to go, and I think a brand new transmission, I mean, nothing beats that. I mean, it's going to be awesome. So yeah, we'll put it through its paces, test it out before we take it out in the woods, but keep an eye out for that test out video, and I will see you in the next update.